Today we talk to Chastity Brown about her new album, Sing to the Walls. We find Chastity on her front porch at home in Minneapolis, where she's seen some things go down in recent times.
But I do not know if it ever show, ever show, ever show, ever show.
How's things in Minneapolis?
Quiet, hot, feels like a nice summer day. Very different over what we've experienced here at the last couple years, and certainly since the uprising.
Right? How is it
But
different?
well, I just mean like, a few summers ago, we were watering down our fences because the city was on fire,
Right?
and there was a national guard presence here. Like there's a military
Man.
presence here. And right now, like I'm watching, so there's like 5 or 6 7-year-olds on my block,
Yeah.
and they just run the show essentially. So I'm just kind of watching their like it's so cute to me, like watching them knock on each other's doors, wait for the other one to come out, and then they walk away talking, and I'm like, what are they talking about? Like,
Right.
you know, um, so that's a cool vibe.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad things are improving, or they just happen to be that way today as opposed to how they were, earlier.
I mean, I think, oh, I mean, this is still America,
Yeah.
you know? And so what any of us decide on our own as improvement, I think just with the pandemic and it being summer, like, um, things feels possible to visit with the people you love.
Yeah.
In terms of America, it's like, I mean, I don't know if you've been watching anything with
Oh,
our
yes.
former president.
Show all of it. Of course.
It's like, I have a sense that, like, justice cannot be contained to be absolved in one moment.
Yep.
You know, we learn that on a basic level of when siblings fight, even though you apologize, the harm. And so we're also talking about the construction of this
Yep.
society here, and there's so many layers. And so any moment of justice is certainly celebrated, but it doesn't by any means like um, make me feel safer,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So therein lies the power of my own joy and the power of my own, like, luxuriating in solitude and how I want to live my life.
Right.
Um, and so, yeah.
Yeah. As you can probably tell, I'm an American person with my accent. I moved to
Mm,
New Zealand in 1994 from Rochester, New York. And as you were
okay.
talking, it reminded me, I was like 9 years old in 1964 when they had big race riots in Rochester and
Mm,
throughout the country. And the fact, this is still happening. I mean, that was 50 plus years ago. Jesus.
yeah.
And before I knew I was going to speak to you today, one of the things I did was check the newspapers, check CNN to see what's going on, and of course you
Sure.
always find out like there's somebody in North Carolina, the police department in some tiny town has quit in mass because the new manager of the town is a black woman. So,
Mm,
and I'm sure there are nuances to that story, but let's face it, it's just ridiculous.
yeah. I was listening. So there is a Tonight Show with Trevor Noah,
Yeah.
and two of the people, corresponders who work on that, one's name is Dulce Salone, and another guy, his name is Josh. Shoot, I can't think of it. They have a podcast in which they argue over things that are nonsense. And one of their recent little argument discussions was like conscious rap versus just booty shaking in the club rap.
Right.
And Josh was like, conscious rap all the way. That's the most important rap. That's the only rap we should be listening to. And
Right.
Dulce said something that really resonated with me. Was just like, for her, she just said, I already know it all. I like, in the sense of like, I know what's happening in the world. I know the harm that is being done. I know what systematic racism is. And so when I go to listen to music, I don't want to deal with any of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to be there.
Yeah.
And just realizing that, like, of course, they're two good friends that are arguing over petty things, and it's just a fun conversation. But there's truth to it as far
Sure.
as being a Black American, and how you spend your time is also a political act.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even if we're not even meaning for it to be, it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think
And,
that's interesting.
and we all, everybody listens to music at a different time for a different purpose. So,
Mm-hmm.
you need it for
Mm-hmm.
all of those, which brings us to your
Yeah.
album, Sing to the Walls. So you do have one song, Golden, which is kind of what drew me to look at CNN when I knew I was going to speak to you this morning. But the rest of the album isn't about that, but still
Yeah.
you felt the need to put that in there.
Oh, excuse me, will I tell my truth? And it rattles up and rings in you, but you don't know what to say or do, so you stay.
You know, the thing about Golden is it feels authentic to me for true life. You know, when you're in love, when you're like surrounded by your family, when you're growing your garden, when you have a smile on your face, the sun is shining, and then bam, there is a very drastic change to your perception of the world, and certainly after someone has lost their life.
Yeah.
um, in any degree, in any situation. And um, so that's why Golden, like, it was just a single, and then it felt necessary um, to not break up the love story, but to acknowledge what has happened in midst of it.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm very clear on um, not centering oppression in my life and in my art. Because like Dulce says, it's like, and even like you were saying, I too will make sure that I'm up on things, and then I get so overwhelmed,
Yeah.
and I'm like, holy crap. Um, and so, there are times where I just am not going to read the news and things like that. But yeah, it's like Golden doesn't take away from the joy. It doesn't take away from anything. It acknowledges the truth of experience.
Yep, yep, yep. So the album was released, what, June 17th? What kind
Yeah.
of reactions and interactions have you had about it that are meaningful to you with fans, with press, with whoever?
I think for me, for folks that are familiar with um, how I have performed over these number of years, or who have, even reviewers that I've spoken to have reviewed a couple of my records, and now the discussions feel different. And
Right?
I appreciate that reflection because I feel different. And um, there's something that I have said a lot, which is like, my last record, I was pretty clear on making room and space for sorrow that wasn't just like quote unquote breakup. So it was like I was like, oh, sorrow, sadness, would you like a glass of wine? Can I get you a cushion? It was like every aspect of my life I was just like, sadness is prevailing. And it's really cool to hear in the in a multiple span of ways, the sonic palette, the drum beats, the melodies, the stories. It's so amazing to hear back that what I attempted, folks are receiving.
Right. Right.
Um, and you know, it's wild to interact again around music.
Yeah.
And like it's wild to I'm just coming off the road from like 8 weeks of my first real touring since the pandemic, of my
Yeah.
first real touring in 2 years. And to see folks like, I keep saying this is a dance record, and clearly it's not. But for me, like, I love mid-tempo all day, every day, and I can just, you know, and to see an audience doing that,
Right.
their own style of moving to this soulful music, um, that's such an honor and such a privilege, you know. So, um, uh, of course, this I have listened to these songs hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. I There's not a second in any part of my album in which I didn't have creative authority with and was really intentional on what is happening at any given moment. And then I just let it go.
Right.
so so I'm still experiencing that feeling of like just vulnerability, you know, and something that matters to me. Um, when I saw that someone from New Zealand wanted to talk about the record, I was like, what?
I know the record has quite a history. You started recording
Yeah.
it in Stockholm and with Brady,
Hmm.
and then it moved over, and it took a while, and it kind of went through some series of different processes. So briefly explain where you were when you started and where you got to.
At the moment of making it with Brady Blade in Stockholm, I really thought that was the record. We
Uh-huh.
recorded 12 songs there. And by the time I got home, I was already recognizing that some of the songs, when I listen to that body of work as it was recorded, I can hear how I was changing. And some of the songs sound like how I used to play.
Right.
And like even instrumentation, it was just like, that's boring. But then when the pandemic popped off and everything was shut down, it was like, oh, literally, some of this music is not even applicable to this wild world that we find ourselves in.
Right.
Um, and so all of a sudden, I was like, holy crap, I haven't been home. At the point I realized maybe I was home for 4 months, which had been the longest time in 7 years for my touring schedule that I'd been home. And I was like, oh my God, I can just write.
Right.
And so I like started assembling little bits and pieces for a makeshift studio. Um, and then was like, oh, I would like to record myself. I would like to have immediacy for my ideas. And so my drummer, who's also an engineer, who also helped me co-produce, Greg Schutte, would give me lessons along the way of how to send him the best quality, like high fidelity vocal take.
Right.
And then my composing just kind of took off because once again it was like what I only realized just in the last week is that in terms of what I think about composing, comp- particularly in my music, is that before the pandemic, I had the opportunity to play with the Minnesota Orchestra, which
Oh,
is an 80-piece orchestra. I had never heard an orchestra play my music,
right.
and it cracked the it cracked the cookie open for me, and I was like, I can do that. I can think about the timbre of a French horn and be like, I know at this point in the song I want something soft but kind of horn like. Like when you start to think about palette, timbre, entrances and exits of instruments, you are in fact composing. And so I just let myself go. And um, I feel addicted in a way to the songwriting process for
Uh-huh.
that. And I feel like all my mentors have always described their type of discipline in a form of clocking in the hours. And I now understand what that means for me. And
Uh-huh.
I now, furthermore, have an understanding that I have that ability, and I think it also helps that I can play so many different instruments
Uh-huh.
because I can think, oh, if I only came up with a bass line today, well, it didn't exist this morning.
There you go.
I might be close to something,
Yep.
and then I come back to work the next day and I'm like, I wonder if I could add a to that bass line. So now I'm like, oh, I have more than a pen and paper, which is some of my mentors are just writers in that sense. And I'm like, holy crap, I can totally cheat. Like I have so many gadgets and gadgets aplenty before I've ever even uttered one part of the lyrical story.
Right.
And so now I take great joy in that, um, in a way that used to, as I would tour, I would pretty much only write and record when I wasn't on the road. But now I want to shape how I'm on the road with carved out time for writing.
Ah,
Um, and that feels really exciting to me. Um, so yeah.
cool. Now, I'm wondering, is it a coincidence, do you think, or that you work with two drummers making this record?
Mm.
Or is there something about working with a drummer that feeds into what you need to have as a
I
collaborator?
think I think with Brady Blade, it started as a coincidence because when I was chatting with Brady and I was like, "Would you recommend any producers?" He was like, "I'll throw my hat in the ring."
Right.
And I was just like, "Done. I will look no further."
Sure.
Having had that experience, I then realized so often when I'm just writing by myself, even just with like my gadget, my little iPhone and the GarageBand, I will often at least give myself a kick drum
Uh-huh.
to continue a flow, even if it's a ballad or if it's like trying to get a dance going. So I was like, holy crap, I always go second to drums. And I didn't want a lot of input, but I wanted some input. And it seemed to be most effective to me. And also wonderful because Greg has all the gear as a producer himself. And so it just became so productive and so imaginative that again, it just was like, where's the most steady flow of creativity? It's between me first in my own world and then to a drummer.
Right.
Because I want to hear like, what's the groove of this? Like
Yeah.
what have I done here? And on this record I did create some of the drum beats, um like on Golden I created that drum beat. But on Sing to the Walls, the drum beat that I created, which was kind of like pseudo rap trap. It was like a little bit more abrasive than actually the song should be. And Greg heard that and he deleted the drums entirely and he created the part that you now hear,
Uh-huh.
which completely serves the song. And it was a total surprise. I was like, what have you done? And then I listened and I was like, what have you done? Oh my gosh. Um, so I think this might be something I'm into for a while now.
Cool.
Hmm.
Good. Now, I think I saw that you have an album release show scheduled in August in Minneapolis, and of course
Yeah.
it'll be a few months after the actual album release. So tell me about that show. Sounds like something special.
Well, First Avenue is like one of Minneapolis's most famous venues.
Thank you,
Of
Prince.
course, yeah, yeah, the iconic images of Prince and Purple Rain. It has the best sound system. Oh my God. It's um oh my God. It feels so good playing on that stage. Like what we're getting as the band is just as yummy as what the audience is getting. Like it's real surround sound, and I'm just like, I want to have a total immersive experience in the hometown. Like I really want to present this music in a way that I never really have here. Used to, I would just be like, let me just share some stuff, let me just share some stuff. But this is a soulful presentation. And in that way, it really marks how I've changed. Um, so I'll have the full band, I'll have a string section, I'll have a little bit of a gospel choir singing the
Cool.
way that only gospel choirs can sing with those moving harmonies. Um, yeah, it's just I've never played a record release show there, so for me, as someone who I moved here as an outsider
Right.
because I grew up in Tennessee and now I've lived here for 15 years, and to say that that's the home like to I this is home now,
Yeah.
and I want to play it like it's one of the best clubs here, so yeah.
Very cool. Now we talked about one track on the album, Golden, which is kind of the outlier. So maybe we'll just touch on it. And you mentioned strings, so Like the Sun has some beautiful production to it and very
Yeah.
uplifting vibe about it. So you care to share
Yeah.
anything about that song?
I would wait for the sun to come up. I would wait. You're like the sun, yeah. And I would wait for the sun to come up. I would wait. You're like the sun, yeah.
Well, the string arrangement is from the arrangement that I did with the Minnesota Orchestra.
Uh,
One of the fun things about that, the composer Andy Thompson, when we were working on it, I said, please go back and listen to Jodeci and SWV, and I want those kind of moments in the orchestra. I never hear an orchestra play those kind of like 2000s R&B, like
right.
just and so those are the most exciting moments. So when I was making the track with Brady, I realized, oh, I retained the rights to the arrangement. We can just bring it in.
Yeah.
And we just laid that right on top of what we had already recorded, and it just fit. We pulled out some of it, because an 80-piece orchestra is a lot.
Yeah.
um, but it also really connects me throughout the album. There's moments of string arrangement that's another way of me giving homage to the elders in soul music. And um, I just was listening over and over again towards the end of the album as I was creating some of the final vocal parts, and I just was like, yeah, like when you put on Otis, there's a string section like the whole time.
Yeah.
I mean, not just a string section, but symphonic arrangements.
Yeah.
Or Aretha or Nina on her some of the New York shows that she did. It's like, and so I was like, oh yeah, I want to have not just like strings playing the chords. Like I really want to have them a part of the whole experience of the record. And in particular on Like the Sun, um, that's one of the most epic songs I've ever recorded.
Uh-huh.
And it it is also me as a songwriter living here trying to tell Prince, like, I hope you'd be happy with this.
Yeah.
I'm trying to literally impress Prince on Like the Sun. And it's
Fair.
also a song about falling in love in Minneapolis, so there's a lot of different components that really tie myself and my heart to the city. And, you know, um, yeah, it's just the other thing about it is like it's the most different chorus that the the chorus was a mystery to me. The way I play the piano, that existed for a good 3 or 4 months before I ever sang, because I was just like, why am I so obsessed with this? The ba 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 ga ga. Like I literally had never written anything like that, and I had no idea how to sing, but I couldn't let it go on the piano. I was like, but there's something cool.
Uh-huh.
And then I was like, what if I approached it um, in that soulful way of like saying a few lines, having space, saying a few more, like it was kind of like all these little building blocks to that song for how I wrote it. Um, and then the performance is just like Brady Blade assembled some of the most talented musicians in Stockholm.
Right.
You put a talented orchestra composition on that, and it's like it couldn't be more epic. And
Excellent.
it's just such a treat. It's such
Cool. So my understanding is you wrote hundreds of songs
a
leading.
treat.
What are you going to do with those? Are you thinking about delving back in and going to them, or are you just moving on and writing more?
Yeah. Um, some of those songs that I wrote, I think of it as like there's a two-track method, I think, to how I write. Sometimes it's just I think of the muse as a woman. When I started dating women, I was under the assumption that as a woman, I would know everything about dating women. That's
Right.
not true. That's not
Okay.
true. That's not true. Every individual is different, of
Yeah.
course. Um, and when I approach songwriting, I think of it in the sense of being like, there's no guarantee on any given day that I'm gonna get the kind of love or kind of interaction that we had yesterday. And if you've ever dated a woman, Marty, or been with a woman, you know that to be true.
Yes.
Just because we were all snooky nooky yesterday, you got to earn it today, buddy. And so I think about songwriting in that way. So I think about it in terms of literally just hanging out and playing for the sake of being devoted to my craft, for having discipline. And yes, I may write something, but unless it has like, I don't know, sometimes songs will talk to me and be like, this can come out of the private space. Um, or sometimes a song will talk to me and I'll talk back and say, but this is personal to me, it's too personal. But the song will say, wouldn't it be to everybody? Who are you to think that you're the only one? That's like,
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
that's the whole point of storytelling. Um, the other track is when I know that I'm like writing for accomplishing recorded composition. I put the songs through fire, like
Hmm.
scrutiny, fire. Um, if it doesn't continue to be exciting, it's off the list. There were a number of songs that were really exciting to me that I even like we mastered and mixed and mastered, and I think I'll release some of those as singles. um, they didn't seem to fit in the family of the record, but they're still like really cool, fun, or meaningful songs. Um, So we'll see. I certainly have plans on it.
Okay.
Yeah, or
We'll
maybe
see.
even just like some acoustic. There's a lot of acoustic piano songs. I do think it'd be quite like I listen to a lot of piano music and a lot of instrumental piano, like Keith Jarrett stuff, and
Right.
it might be nice to just share that in some
Sure.
way, and not completely involve capitalism, and just
Yeah.
so yeah.
Very nice. Excellent. Well, this has been fascinating, and thank you very much for sharing all that with me. Hopefully you get
Yeah.
down to this part of the world at some point in your career, and we'd love to see and hear you then. But in the meantime, good luck with the show in
Absolutely.
Minneapolis. It sounds like it's going to be
Thank you,
awesome.
Marty.
Yeah.
Have a good rest of the day.
You too. Have a great one.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.